I'm Mark Ruwedel, and on my right or left is Nigel. Say hi, Nigel.
Hi. Hi, Mark. Hi, everybody.
Okay, Nigel Raab, scholar and author. We're going to talk about the project 72 and 1/2 miles across Los Angeles. And we're going to start with Nigel here. So what prompted you to begin this walk, this journey? And if you want to talk to us a bit about the process, if you will.
Mark, thanks for that question. For me, what was interesting as a relatively new arrival when I did the walk, Los Angeles is enormous. It's absolutely enormous, and it extends such a distance that I had not experienced that. Even in a place like New York City, where I went to school, you can walk Manhattan much easier, actually. And so what I wanted to do was just to get a sense of Los Angeles on foot. Normally we think of Los Angeles as a city of cars, but you can also walk it on foot. And then the other thing that I wanted to do was explore a route that didn't really go through those traditional areas. If you can go down Pico, you can go down Santa Monica Boulevard. There are all these Melrose, there are all these main, very well-known places that tend to go through higher in the hills and areas that are more affluent and I guess more Hollywood-ish. And so what I wanted to do was find a route that went further south and went through these different neighborhoods so I could explore how the city changed from west of the 405 to east of the 405. And as you move further out, and it got less and less dense.
You are a sort of an urban hiker to begin with. This wasn't your first jaunt of epic proportions. Am I right?
Yeah, so I had actually set out to do this earlier, and I've walked to downtown Los Angeles actually a number of times from our house, and it's about 14 miles, something like that. I've walked further downtown. I've done these walks, and I actually once took my entire class at Loyola Marymount University where I teach, and we did this walk 14 miles to downtown. But the first time I did it, I thought, okay, I'm going to do half today, and I'll just do half tomorrow. And I walked and I got about 5 miles past downtown and I'm like, okay, I'm halfway there. And like, this was not true at all. I was completely wrong. I was about a third of the way there, and it extends much, much, much further. So I did these practice walks, if you want. And then finally I realized how big the city is. And I went back and did the whole thing.
Okay. And so but this route you plotted was, it's not a straight line. Also, it, as you said before, it avoids what would pop into at least my imagination. If you said a line across Los Angeles, I would think, Hollywood Boulevard or Sunset Strip, and you avoid all of that. And for people that know the geography we're speaking about, almost until you get quite far east, everything is south of the 10 freeway, and most of the action of the city is north of the 10 freeway, if you will. So that in itself was kind of interesting. But maybe what's not clear yet is the relationship of what you did to a book, because I'm still not clear if you thought about writing about it after, or if you did the walk to get material to write about.
So I did the walk before I thought about writing a book about it. Or even that someone would actually have the idea to come along and photograph the route. So, which I think is wonderful. So it was more just a curiosity to see the city in a different light, because normally many of the neighborhoods I walk through, you see from elevated highways. You never go in them, but you see them from elevated highways.
You're going fast.
And if you're lucky, you're going fast. In COVID, you actually go a little bit faster, but
yeah, that's it's, by the way.
I mean, is it overrated? Okay.
For a few months, but the traffic's pretty much back to normal.
Okay. Well, I guess, yeah, it's good to have some things that are normal, but I don't know if that's a good thing though. But yes, there are these transitions. And the other thing is I'm a historian. So I was also interested in knowing, and this came after the walk, because you go through neighborhoods, you go through African-American neighborhoods, you go through Hispanic neighborhoods, but that's not how they began their lives. So I sort of moved through space. And when I came back, I looked and sort of moved through time to see the layers of these different neighborhoods. But I couldn't have done that without taking the time to walk through all those. They're very, very different places.
Okay. And Have you said yet that this took you 4 days?
Yeah, it took, so the walk, yeah, the walk was, it's urban hiking. It's not really considered a feat. It's not like an Olympic event or anything like that.
Right.
It took 4 days, which I did on 2 separate weekends. So I wasn't really trying to sort of be fast or anything like
Uh-huh.
that, but I really was trying to do everything on foot
Okay.
and to, take that time. And that, again, that's such an extended city. I once looked in that, like, because I study Russia, I once looked what would be the equivalent in Moscow. And 72 miles across Moscow, even though Moscow is as big, or if not bigger than Los Angeles, you're starting in farmers' fields and you're walking for tens of miles before you actually hit the city. So
Okay.
Los Angeles is enormous.
Yeah, it certainly is. And you didn't actually walk till the end of the city. You walked till the
Yeah.
county line, right?
Yeah,
Right.
that's right. So to be sure, I guess to be sure on the definition, I walked to San Bernardino because it was meant, which is San Bernardino County. It crosses LA County line. But that's when you get to San Bernardino, then now you're no longer going to have continuous suburbs. Now the desert starts to open up and the landscape
Right.
changes into what, I mean, you might consider it traditionally the countryside or something like
Uh-huh.
that. But it's sort of that edge.
I sort of think of that area as the transition zone where
Yeah. Yeah.
it moves from the more or less Mediterranean climate of the base to
Yes.
the desert, and,
Yes.
which is where all the orchards used to be.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay. So uh, you did this walk. Do you remember the date of the
It
even?
was it was actually quite a while ago because the
Yeah.
project has taken a while. So it's probably like my guess is about 10 or 11 years ago that I did this.
Okay. Because I
I've
was thinking
aged since.
maybe this was something somebody would want to know. I think the earliest photographs I made were 2011.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so we'll switch over to what I did for a second.
Yeah.
You did this walk, and then you wrote this piece of this manuscript
Yep.
afterwards, and then you had the brilliant idea to ask me if I if I wanted to photograph it. If I remember that conversation correctly, you referred to my project Westward: The Course of Empire, which was
Hmm.
tracing a
Yeah.
bunch of
Oh,
areas
yeah.
in the desert, and that was kind of interesting to me because that's a project that's really about line as much as point. Most photographs are
Hmm.
points on a line,
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and when you asked me if I wanted to do that, I sort of approached the idea with a bit of trepidation. I don't know how much I let on at the moment, but I thought, well, uh, I'll make a few pictures. Maybe I don't know. Maybe Nigel can use a few for something, or I wasn't like gung ho.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, Although your invitation came more or less the same time I was trying to devise ways of photographing in the city because until um, I moved here in 2002, and then I guess until about 5 or 6 years after being here, I started becoming more interested in the city as a subject. And as you said, Los Angeles is so large. It's like, how do you start? What do you do?
Hmm.
What do you choose? Uh, I, I
I was gonna
I
just
was
interrupt
Yeah,
briefly. Say
please.
we both arrived in Los Angeles at about the same time, so
Okay.
we were both on that same trajectory of trying to find a way to
Uh,
understand culturally the city that we actually now call home.
yeah. Yeah, that's about like 18 years ago now.
Yeah.
And I had some familiarity with it from travel, and because I've been photographing the deserts east of California,
Hmm.
for 25, 30 years. So, uh, but anyway, I had started working on a few smaller projects that were based on the Ed Ruscha's photographs from the early mid, throughout the 1960s, and using those little books that he made as kind of maps for me to
Hmm.
kind of find a way to work within the city. And then it took a while to finally your trajectory across the city became yet another map. So because following Ruscha's books or following your map there was a certain set of decisions that I didn't have to deal with
Yeah.
because I didn't choose the route. You know, I had to deal with what was there in my own way, but I didn't choose to photograph on Gage Avenue because it was scenic. I chose to walk on because you would walk that way, you know, for example. So there was that. I think just to like how for both of us, how the one note about the process that I think is worth noting is the use of the Google pedometer, you know. So I was able, because you used that, I was able to print out maps of your route, you know, which were marked by mile too, which was also important to me, you know, because I think when, excuse me, when I first started, I just, as a test, I think I went to an area that was more or less like 1 mile in from mile zero, you know, just, and I made a few pictures and I thought, this is going to be difficult. And I'm not sure I'm not that interested in it, you know? And then I thought, well, I'll try again. I'll go out. And then I went a few more miles out. And I think, then I started getting interested, like, because this is a problem that's kind of fascinating finally. But like, what do I do? How do I, you know, 72.5 miles? That's a lot of stuff, you know. And so you know, I came up with these different ideas about, you know, strategies, if you will. I'll only photograph looking east because that's the direction you walked, or I'll only photograph at intersections, or and the longer I worked, the more I just finally had to toss all that stuff. And what I decided to do was just photograph whatever caught my eye, without even knowing whether you even noticed it. So we can I think that's an interesting point to come back to a little bit later in the talk, because there might be like some surprises in the book for you, you know?
Yeah. Oh, and I was wondering if I could ask about, because you're talking about the book, just to ask whether when you selected the prints for the book, if you selected them by each mile, or if you had a strategy the way you entered these photographs into the book.
Once I should say that, you know, I started off with like thinking, you know, maybe Nigel will publish something and he'll need a picture or two, you know, that it was like, okay. But it didn't take long to get completely addicted to this idea. And then so after I sort of jettisoned all these kind of conceptual strategies, I thought, well, I have to have, my goal will be to have one good picture for every mile. So that would be like, you know, 72 and a half pictures, you know? And so I got this really large oversized blank sketchbook, and I just dedicated a couple pages with a pencil, 2 to 4 pages per mile. And it became like a stamp book, you know?
I've seen it.
Paste in the, so as I photographed, I'd make work prints of things that caught my eye, and I would paste them in there. And then, you know, then I'd say, well, I don't have to do anything this Friday, I'll go work on so I'd look at my stamp book and say, well, I better, you know, the mid 30s of the mileage, there's nothing there yet. So I'll go out there. And then I would use your map, like, where is mile 30, you know, and I'd end up somewhere, I don't know, on Ontario, California. We should be clear, because you're actually talking to me from Ontario, Canada.
Yes.
So we don't want to confuse the geography even further. So in terms of the book, and in fact, what was, I don't know, I'll just say it without qualifying it, some of the miles were a lot more difficult than others in terms of finding things of visual interest to me. Yeah.
I was going to say, when you do the walk, or when I did the walk, I mean, it's a similar phenomenon where certain stretches you think, no, surely I've seen this before, you know, and at some point your mind goes into this loop that you're just, you know, retreading the same thing, which I mean, that's just Southern California, that's suburban Southern California, but it's also that there were long stretches like that. Yeah. And then there are other stretches when you get dramatic changes, like when you get into Fontana in the east towards the end, and it's like the Kaiser steel mill and stuff like that. Those are fascinating.
Yeah. So in fact, there's a couple miles that I never did find anything to photograph, but but when I structured the book, I had this conversation with Michael Mack about, like, how can we do this? He had seen the workbook, a big pile of prints, um, and so we came up with a plan that certain misunderstanding on my part didn't quite work out the way I thought I was going to, just structurally the book. But basically, I divided your 72-mile walk into 6 12-mile units, and then within those 6 sections of the book, I needed to choose pictures in units of 4, and this is where I messed up somewhat, because I went a bit too, not in terms of what I think the book looks like, but in terms of an initial structure that Michael and I had talked about. I added too many groups of 4 to certain sections because they were the most interesting sections for me. But regardless, from the get-go, I knew it wasn't even important to me that there would be the same number of pictures for every 12-mile unit. Some of them were just visually not just more interesting, but more complex. The changes within, from say mile 14 to mile 18, is much more dramatic than say mile 61 to 64. I don't know through those numbers, but that idea. So that's what I did. I just kept, adding and subtracting and so on and so forth, and in these like 6 piles. And the book, there might be some of the double page spreads might cheat just a little bit, but the book is pretty much in sequence, in terms of, mile 0 to mile 72.5. I mean, the first picture is down the street from where you live, and for your protection, I didn't show your house. But,
yeah.
And the last picture is literally where you ended the walk and took the train back home. So
yeah, that's a beautiful train station.
Yeah, it is. It is. So that's how I structured the book. The way I photographed for the project, and I should note that you spent 4 days walking. I have no idea how much time you spent writing. But I worked on my project for over 2 years. Partly because, I didn't work on it exclusively, but I also did it piecemeal. It was very much different than your walk, which the equivalent would be if you got dropped off at mile 30 and started walking or something like that, because I would just choose a section, and as the pictures piled up, I would try to, obviously choose sections that I hadn't photographed or hadn't successfully photographed earlier or something like that. And then sometimes I'd spend the whole day working on that. Other times, if I was going out to the desert, I might say, well, I'm going to get off the freeway and walk mile 70, just, in the morning light or something like that,
Yeah, we went out together to San Bernardino once.
We did.
Yeah.
I think we did. So it took you 4 days to walk. It took us 2 days to drive.
Yeah.
So, and it took me over 2 years to photograph. So now you've seen a lot of the pictures that I made. There was an exhibition at Loyola Marymount University, and which was a fairly large selection of pictures.
Yep.
Still, when they're in a book, it's a different. Looking at a book, turning pages is a lot different than sort of wandering around a gallery space. And so I guess the question is, is the book, what I did with the book, a surprise to you in any way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually think no, if I'm allowed to say that, because when I think of the walk, and what surprised me were, for example, some of the major transitions which are important for me were crossing the Los Angeles River and crossing the St. Gabriel River, because the St. Gabriel River is the forgotten river in Los Angeles. In the book, there are 2 beautiful photographs of the rivers, and the photographs are taken further south on the rivers. Normally, if you think of the Los Angeles River, you're thinking of it downtown. Maybe I think there's a scene from Greece in there or something like that. But this is further down in a Hispanic part of, or Latino part of town. And then the St. Gabriel River, because I know you actually, I think you descended the
I
You
went under the
descended
bridge.
you went under the bridge. And so you
Yeah.
get a really good sense of this very strange space. And the rivers run along the highways. So you've got these major rivers which don't have water most of the time, and nobody sees them because they're driving on the highway. So I thought that was
Somebody
surprising.
once said that people are reminded that there's a river in Los Angeles when they read that someone drowned in it.
Yeah.
Actually, the photograph I made under the bridge is one of the relatively few times I had any kind of, say, hostile response to my presence, if you will, because of course people were living under the bridge, and I didn't want to photograph them, but they didn't know what I was doing under there. And there's another picture in the book. It's a picture of a bunch of objects on display for sale on the sidewalk. I think there's speaker, and in the background you can see there's actually a bed. But the fellow who was selling those things, I actually asked him if I could photograph it, and he said, sure, fine. And he said, what, are you with the newspapers, which is a common. And I said, yeah. I said, nah. And I didn't want to go into like this long. Well, I know this guy, Nigel, and he walked and blah, blah. I just said, well, no, it's just my hobby, And so I took the pictures, and then I walked away. I had parked just around the corner. And I noticed that the guy actually followed me. I wrote down my license plate number, which I thought was just really weird. But that brings to mind a couple different things about the edit and the sequence of the book. If you look at the book, my photographs, there's, I think, maybe 5 at most, 4 or 5 pictures that have people in them.
Yeah.
And for people that have never been to Los Angeles or spent much time in the city, that might seem like a really deliberate sort of strategy on my part, but in fact, it's just the way it is out there. There's almost nobody walking. They're almost, once in a while, there's like a Russian historian walking by on a 72-mile walk, but for the most part, people walk from their cars to their homes or cars to the stores, and so I neither tried to photograph people nor tried to avoid them, and the final edit, but there was that one, what I thought, this wonderful picture that what you and I both refer to as the juice guys.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because I had passed them maybe a weekend before. They were in the same spot, and that part of the walk, you're actually walking a 4-lane.
Yes.
It's not a highway, but it's a 4-lane road with a 50-mile-an-hour speed limit, between, I guess, Pico Rivera and
El Monte.
and Whittier Narrows, where
Whittier Narrows and then El Monte.
The river comes in. And so the second time I saw him, I stopped, and I said, whatever, I'll buy whatever you're selling if you let me photograph you. And it turned out to be this kind of amazing citrus drink they were making that had a lot of chili in it. It was this kind of,
I had it.
Yeah, well, when you and I went,
yeah.
But for the most part, sometimes people would say, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just photographing," and that was it. But so let me backtrack a bit, because
Can I just add something quickly in terms of like, when you're, the photographs have very few people. And when I did the walk, I saw very few people. Yeah. But one of the ironic things is there's sidewalks everywhere.
Yeah.
There's sidewalks everywhere. And one of the very, very few places where there is no sidewalk is where they sold those drinks. There's a short stretch of a few miles, and that's about the only place without real sidewalks. Everything else had sidewalks, and you would just walk alone on these sidewalks.
There's a photograph in the book, and I don't remember, it's more than halfway, let's just say that, where it's looking down the sidewalk and the sidewalk just ends.
Yeah.
And, but which is also, it magically reappears maybe 3 blocks away or something like that.
Yeah, that would be,
very, very strange. So it's possible to walk, but the distances are great.
Yeah.
One thing. And people often live and work, 50 miles apart. So there's all, and we won't, that's a whole other conversation about the relationship of the automobile. the development of Los Angeles, but the automobile is why it's so big, or one of the
Oh
reasons
yeah.
for sure. Um, so if I wanted to backtrack and say something about how I photographed, because when I first began those first sort of tentative stabs at doing this project, I did what I normally do, which is I went out with a tripod mounted 4x5 inch view camera, and which worked fine in some cases, but after as the work progressed, I started using handheld cameras too, for partly because of traffic. I had to act really quick sometimes, and also partly because there were certain areas where I just wanted to be as discreet and as invisible as possible. And so the pictures in the book are actually made with 3 different camera types.
Well,
Somewhat unusual, I guess, for me. Usually a project, and a tool go together.
I
You know.
I guess you want to hear that I use 3 different pairs of shoes. Is that what you're thinking?
And somebody out there is going to want to know what kind of camera, what kind of shoes, right? We're not going to tell them. Okay. So so this idea that the photographs are not so surprising to you is kind of interesting to me, but because I never read what you wrote before I went out, because I did not want to illustrate whatever you had written.
Oh no, I thought that was
So
great.
um,
I was very happy about that.
yeah, I think that was that
Yeah.
was a really good decision on my part as
Hmm.
well. But um, that's why it's sort of interesting to me that you're not that surprised by the pictures, because we didn't really confer in any way. I think there's only one picture, one place I photographed where you said that was really important and don't miss it, and that's where your route crosses the 405. Uh,
Yes,
uh,
yes. I
which
like that photograph.
Thank you, thank you.
I like that photograph.
And that's one of the ones that actually has a pedestrian in it. There,
Yeah, yeah.
it's not
I
very much.
like that. I like that photograph because for me, the 405, like when you think 405 is more of a wall than a thoroughfare there, because we think of it as getting you from, Long Beach to the Getty or something like
You're right.
that. But it actually is a strict divide between communities, and it functions as a social wall. And so
Yeah,
crossing that 405, because that was right at the very beginning of the route, for me is very symbolic in terms of what a highway means. And then when you walk, you think about this, for the next couple of hours and whatnot. So
yeah. It's your first Rubicon.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
The first picture, the sort of intro picture, is actually a Cadillac convertible driving away from.
yeah.
You
It's
know,
funny because
that was a good.
that's our neighborhood,
Yeah,
which does it's there. That our neighborhood does not have the feel of like this Southern California convertible Cadillac with a big dramatic home. Like on the left, ours is a modest neighborhood, and it's very funny because it sort of makes you think you're somewhere else for a moment.
well, sometimes, a lot of the stuff I photographed, I thought, well, this is really boring, but I would try anyway, because
Yeah.
was like, one of my first problems was, how do I photograph your immediate neighborhood, mile
Hmm.
0 to 1. And I set up, that was a view camera picture, a tripod camera picture. And I set up the camera because of that weird big sort of what we call monster homes,
Yeah.
balloon mansions, or, starter castles. Uh, and I was just ready to make this kind of dumb, boring picture of the road, and the Cadillac drove by. Fortunately, very slowly, you know,
I
uh,
didn't
or
yeah,
something.
can I just say one quick thing about what you said
Yeah,
there is because one of the things about because you said it's a, it's line, you mentioned the expression that's like it's a line style of photography, not a point style of photography.
but they're all
And so
points on the line, of course.
yeah,
I mean,
but what's interesting about the photographs and the way they're laid out in the book is that the photograph, like each photograph says something about the one before it and the one next, the one after it, because you're actually moving through this. So it's
right.
quite true. Maybe there's one photograph that you think of or a viewer thinks of as boring, but then you look at the next photograph and something's changed, and it's that change that is
Yeah, yeah,
also like inherent in what's going on in that book.
yeah, yeah. I think that's why that was part of the reasoning in my selection as well. Well, if I was going to make a big print and put this on the wall, it wouldn't be this one, but it's a really
Yeah.
interesting
Yeah.
picture as a transition, say, between
Yeah.
the previous and the following, and so on. And Morgan's design of the book, where the pictures are actually out to the edge, centered, also sort of, encourages that idea that there's this continuum thing.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and I think dividing it up into, an arbitrary, I mean, it's very symmetrical, which is nice, the 12 miles. That has nothing to do with how I photographed or how you walked, but it's very useful in terms of like charting, for a viewer to chart it, where they are in the map, which
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the book we do have a reduced version of the map I had made for the exhibition, which locates your route with two other kinds of lines, the freeway system and the rivers. So most of the freeways going east-west and the rivers going north-south. So,
Yeah. 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 Do you have any, for you, are there any preferred photographs or images that stick out to you? If your mind drifts to that route, does one of your, do certain images come?
There's a couple parts of the route that I'm often tempted to go back and photograph some more, because it was interesting beyond the project. It was interesting in terms of other things that I either had done previously or am involved in more recently. And one of them is Gage Avenue, which is sort of, I guess, the first third of the walk.
I went a long way along Gage.
Just like this perfect display of the kind of bungalow style, and the non-franchise hamburger stands and all that kind of old LA stuff. And the other section was pretty much near the end, late 60s, after we crossed the railroad once again to get into San Bernardino, where it's just visually really dense, and it's a kind of railroad landscape, if you will. That's a place that in fact I have gone back just to kind of poke around, things like that. But I would never, ever go and try to photograph, say, where those big malls are out in Ontario again. I was, the first time I went, it was just a dismal failure. And it was those pictures. There's a picture of, there's a store that has human hair for sale and stuff like that. Just before or after the signboard guy who's holding up the big sign, so you can't see his face.
Oh yeah, I like that one. That's a really,
he's got great.
That's Rancho Cucamonga. What a name.
Okay, Rancho Cucamonga. Yeah. So there's so much traffic out there. I actually made a point of getting up really early one week, Sunday, and getting out to set up the camera by 8 a.m. to make that picture, because it was just impossible. And that's another thing that I had my suspicions, but one of the things I learned on this project was every single street in Los Angeles, large and small, at every time of day, on every day of the week, has traffic.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So to try to get those photographs.
Right.
I was just going to add something when you spoke about Gage, and you said that Gage is, non-franchise hamburger stands.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things that I discovered when walking the route is you enter these non-franchise zones. Like, you think of the United States as all McDonald's, Starbucks, and all these major chains, but there are these stretches where they don't go, and you don't see the franchises. You see something completely different. And I thought that was really, for me, that was a very interesting part of the walk.
Just past Sunday, my wife and I went out to get a hamburger at Louis III Burgers, which is not franchise in that. And, the product is so superior.
Yeah.
And no more expensive, You and I had lunch in one of the places that I've, that's the,
we had
the book.
We had goat's head soup.
Well, as I recall, we ordered pretty much what any gringo would order, some tacos and maybe a burrito or something. And it was a weekend, of course, and the woman, probably cook/owner, was really disappointed that we didn't order birria, which is soup. And so she brought us these little cups.
Oh, okay. That was what happened. Okay.
And
I remember it being good.
It was really good. Yeah.
It was very good. So I've looked at well, I've seen the photographs many times, and I have a favorite one, which is as you get into Fontana and you're right near the Kaiser Steel Mill. And as I was wondering if you could just talk about the process in this photograph or any of the thoughts you have in this photograph.
Yeah, that's well, first of all, in terms of my process, of course, you walked past that, but
Yeah.
my problem was often like, where can I legally park to take cameras out of the car and walk to, and sometimes, sometimes it was fairly easy, but that particular stretch, there's no parking for over a mile. So I parked probably in mile 62 or 62.5 and then walked that stretch in the opposite direction of your walk. I walked east, and because I knew I needed, one, it was really interesting to look at these abandoned steel mills, but also it was a really important part of the quote story, if you will,
Mm-hmm. Mm.
and I think I did that twice. And the picture that you're referring to, I don't remember if I made that the first time I tried or the second time, but the second time was a little easier because I knew where to park. I had solved that problem. So, and in fact, I walked that with the big camera because it was going to be an architectural type photograph. And I made several pictures in that space, that 1 mile space, but that particular one, looking down, it's actually looking in the direction that you walked in that. And we see this kind of, we see
Yeah.
all the kind of, I mean, they're not literally falling down, but they are kind of ruins of the industrial age. And when the city of Fontana, which is just
Yeah.
past there, was fairly well off in the heyday. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it was populated by union member steel workers, and of course now it's really fallen on hard times because all that industry is gone. In the book, the preceding picture is kind of interesting in regards to that social history, because of course it's a photograph of a very new what do they call those, industrial park kind of warehouse building, of a completely anonymous looking geometric structure that you have no idea what its function is. But it suggests this kind of consumer, or this kind of I mean, I don't literally know what it does, and so, but it makes me think of the new economy, which is consumer goods being bought and sold online, and packaged by and delivered by robots and stuff like that. So it's one of the greatest sort of juxtapositions in the book, that
Yeah.
idea
Oh,
of
for sure.
crossing these. I mean, in that case, you're stepping back in time almost. You're going from the present to the past within a half a mile. And again, and that's the interesting thing. That's what finally got me hooked on the project, and it's probably what you found so fascinating as well.
Yeah.
For sure. So, and in fact, I remember that after I'd made most of the pictures, and certainly after you had done your work, when we drove the route together and talked about what we had seen, and I did stop and make some pictures, I think, a few times, but mostly it was for us to kind of review and compare our experiences, those two 30-some mile drives each one. But when we got to the end, the San Bernardino metro station, which was the old San Bernardino Southern Pacific Railroad station, I mean, it looks very snazzy, and it's all cleaned up and so on, but the restrooms were closed.
Oh yeah, well, then the train station's closed.
Right.
It's a beautiful train station, but it's closed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sort of I think said something about the current state of affairs as well.
Yeah.
So, one thing I think maybe we haven't not clarified. I wanted to say that I wouldn't have done this project if you hadn't done yours.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, it's quite far from the idea of collaboration.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And there was some interest in the question of the relationship between your project and mine, and also how different my project was from other things I've done because of its relationship to yours. And I was thinking about that, and that's both sort of true and not. If like the Westward Project, those railroads, I picked which railroads to photograph, but I certainly didn't pick where they went. You know,
Yeah.
okay, and my projects that are based on place names, like the largest one being Pictures of Hell. The idea was that I would go to that place because of what it was called, and then the photograph had to be made there regardless of what it looked like. It couldn't, if there was something more interesting to me visually 180 degrees away, that was cheating. I had to photograph the Devil's Gate, not the really cool thing be in the other direction. So so a lot of my work didn't have those they're not these kind of limits or sort of rules, if you will. And when I look back at all the pictures I made of along your route, they seem to fall into two broad categories. One is like pictures of the route itself, like looking more, and then pictures that are pretty much like 90 degrees, like if you looked across the street, or although I wasn't always sure what side of the street you walked on, and that so there was some flexibility for me there. I didn't try to be that that close to the walk. But trying to articulate this, I was reminded of something we said when I showed you some early work prints, and you said, "Oh, that's not. I didn't walk that," because I had strayed from Gage Avenue to Slauson for some reason. I made pictures of these. I remember there were trees that had hundreds and hundreds of initials carved in the trunks, and I was really proud of those pictures. And you said, "Well, I didn't walk there." Right away. I was impressed with that.
But
And when we began talking, you mentioned, among other boulevards, Pico, and I've been trying to do something about Pico Boulevard. It's a little less guided by some other work than the relationship between your walk and my walk. But there's this Peter Sheldall, there's the New Yorker art critic and a poet of long standing, an art critic of long standing. In the late 60s, he wrote a poem called To Pico, and it appears in a book of Ed Richet's drawings called Guam Airlines. And I've always loved that poem. In fact, I've read it out loud while I was driving visitors from out of town down Pico Boulevard. And so I've been trying to do something with that and put it together with Sheldall's poems and that. So, which will end up being another kind of line project, if you will. So.
And I guess part of that is there are an infinite number of routes that go through Los Angeles. They're not there until you make them, though.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
I was going to add, because you talked about like your Hell Project and Westwards. Was it Westwards to the Empire? How was the
Westward, the Course of Empire?
Westward, the Course of Empire, where the route is given. It's like when you did the show at Loyola Marymount University, the title of the show was Following the Prescribed Path. And it was this idea that artists followed something that was prescribed for them, but turned it into something that was their own work. And so that was, that was part of the show, Following the Prescribed Path.
And of course, in photography, we have these, this whole tradition of the American road trip,
Yeah.
We'll just dangle that little historical footnote there and leave it go.
Yeah. So you can do a road trip, not to Los Angeles, and not in a car in Los Angeles, but you can do it with a camera in Los Angeles.
I'm gonna suggest that I think we've covered pretty well here, and I'm gonna say thanks, Nigel, and it's been fun talking about this.
Thanks, Mark. It's been great talking to you too.
And thanks for walking.
Yeah, and thanks for photographing.